thank you. So I was asked to represent the Colorado water users when in the Colorado River Basin Supply and Demand Study. So I had the pleasure of going to all of the meetings with all 7 basin states, and I represented you folks, the Southeast District. I was hired primarily by the Front Range Water Council, which includes the Southeast District and Colorado Springs, and the Western Slope. So my first challenge was to try and represent 2 entities, Western Slope and Eastern Slope, that don't always agree on compact issues. And every time I do this presentation, I get a little more brazen, and because this topic was about supply challenges, I have to start out with my disclaimer. All right. Which is making sure that everyone recognizes that I am not representing anybody's views but my own here. So I have everyone in the world, and you can just add your name here to people that I'm not representing, because I gave a similar presentation at Water Congress and I got lots of feedback, and I'm even making it a little more challenging this time to go with the topic. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong buttons. So just to remind you, and I'm sure there isn't any, maybe there's not too many people in this room that haven't heard of this study, which was completed and finalized just before Christmas. The purpose of the study was to look at imbalances on the Colorado River Basin between supply and demand, and look at ways that could potentially meet those imbalances, so strategies to resolve the imbalances. And one of the important things that everyone kept saying all throughout the study is it's not a decisional document, but it's considered a call to action. I want to start first with the demand piece of it. These are the projected demands for the state of Colorado, for Colorado River water. So it's not just Western Slope water, but it's the amount of water that the Eastern Slope Front Range folks would need, and the Arkansas folks would need from the Colorado River to have a full supply. They looked at 6 different supply scenarios, and they all had different storylines. But the point of this graphic is the blue line on top is our apportionment, and the other graphs, the columns, are our demands. And out to 2060, Colorado still doesn't have a demand that meets the apportionment they're entitled to under the Colorado River Compact. And in fact, the entire upper basin doesn't meet their apportionment. So on the left-hand side, we see the upper basin demands. This is all 4 of the upper basin states together, and their apportionment out to 2060, and they're still not meeting it. Now, the lower basin demand, on the other hand, is over their apportionment today, and it just continues to grow over time. So to me, that is a very important piece of the puzzle here. And the key findings for Colorado are just what I said. We're not at our demand. We're not at our full apportionment under the compact by 2060, nor are the upper basin states added together, but the lower basin states are already exceeding their apportionment. And the imbalances in the lower basin are primarily due to that fact, that they are over their demand. So now, challenges for Colorado. We want to be part of the overall solution. Colorado sat at the table with all 7 basin states, and we continue to say we want to be part of the solution for the Colorado River Basin as a whole. But supporting the lower basin to continue their development may limit our ability to develop our entitlements. So there's challenge number 1, and also the first time I'm getting myself in trouble today. So the second thing the study did was look at potential supplies into the future. And they actually looked at 4 different supply scenarios. They looked at historical supply, they looked at way back historical supply using tree ring and paleo information, and then they looked at future supply based on global climate models. So this is just the moving average of the history of what we've seen of natural flows at Lees Ferry, which is the delivery point for the upper basin part of the compact. And as we can see, and we all know because we live in Colorado, there's a huge range of flows. And in fact, from 5.5 annually to 25 million. The mean annual flow is 15 million acre feet. That's what the compact was built on, was that there was 15 million acre feet of natural flow in the basin. The mean annual flow from 1991 to 2010 is 13.7. And what we have seen is people grabbing onto that and saying, we're already seeing climate change. And I just wanted to throw in another number. The mean annual flow from 1931 to 1960 was also 13.7 million acre feet. So it's clearly very variable. This is what the projected climate models look like. So this is the natural flow again, same point at Lee's Ferry. And the point I want to make on this graph, loud and clear, you'll see there's a little blue shading on the top. That is the same scale as the graph you see before. That blue shading is not shown in the basin study report. So this graphic sitting next to the other graphics make climate change look like it's really a problem. But again, we have the same kind of ranges we've seen in history with the climate change models. The average mean annual flow is that 13.7 that we talked about for both most recent history and in the 1930s through 60. 25% of the global climate models do predict a mean annual flow actually greater than the 15 million acre feet we've seen historically. And 25% predict mean annual flow much less. So that's out of the whole 112 global climate supplies models. So the key findings for Colorado, for me, is that the risk of a leaf ferry deficit was considered. We always knew that climate was variable. We always knew there were chances we couldn't meet our obligation from the upper basin. And in fact, that is why we built crisp reservoirs. That's why we built Lake Powell and other Colorado River storage projects. We knew that climate was very variable. The last point that I think is a key finding for Colorado is we find people very often trying to set probabilities for the future. We know that climate's getting warmer. We can see that. We know that climate is variable. We know things are going to change. But trying to predict it and use probabilities, I think, my personal opinion, is unproductive. The other key findings, the shortages in the upper basin that we see based on this river basin study that Reclamation did, they're due to limited supply and they're nothing new. Everyone in this basin lives with the risk of supply limitations. We know it, we live it, we're in Colorado. Some years we have lots of supply, some years, last year, maybe this year, not so much. And using the historical hydrology, so if we just put our future demand, our increasing demand on historical hydrology, we don't have any increased risk of a leaf ferry deficit. But on the other hand, can't bury our heads in the sand because about half of the global climate models result in at least 1 year of a leaf ferry deficit starting in about 2040. So if we look at what the climate experts are predicting, we have the possibility of being in trouble in the future. Our challenge is that I think the study doesn't indicate an immediate crisis or sense of urgency for Colorado. Again, can't bury our heads in the sand, but it's not like it's doom and gloom tomorrow and we all need to be running for cover. And our challenge is, how does that future risk, which we see in the climate models, how should we consider that in our future development? So, to make things worse, part of the problem is that drama makes the news. If we just say the exact same results of the study, we don't, if we just put the technical analysis out there, it's not all that interesting. So, there was a publication from Reclamation that said the study shows a 3.2 million acre feet imbalance in the Colorado River. And once that published, it became the tagline. That 3.2 million included all of the global climate models. It included the worst case of everything. It didn't include looking at all of the different scenarios and showing that lots of the scenarios show we don't have any issues in the future with a least ferry deficit. And there was no recognition in the study, and as part of the study, Tim, I can tell you, we talked about this a lot, but it was all for one and one for all. The study didn't say that imbalances are largely due to lower basin developing over their apportionment, because that wouldn't have been the correct thing to say. But that's one of our challenges, is that we're not actually saying that out loud. And again, challenges. The results can't be picked to make any point. This was a recent article in the Denver Post. Climate change projections show 10 to 30% less water in the river by 2050. That's just not true. I have all of the models on my computer, and I can tell you guys that's not true. If you select the driest of the 112 global climate models, that's the case. If you look at all of them, 20% actually show more flow in the river, and 30% show less. So it's just not completely a true story. And context is important when we're reading articles and white papers published by advocacy groups. We always need to remember who's behind the story, who's publishing it, what's their point of view. And I'm an engineer, so I just look at facts. But again, Colorado's challenges. So once we defined the supply and demand imbalances, we had to look at how to meet them. And we had key metrics that were important for the state of Colorado in defining when we have a problem and when we need to put on an option and strategy to try and mitigate imbalances. Of course, the first one is the leaf area deficit. And that essentially indicates our risk associated with developing our full entitlement. Upper basin shortages, that indicates supply for consumptive uses. Again, we're used to upper basin shortages. We see them essentially every year on some of our smaller trips, but even on our big trips in dry years we see them. We've lived with that and learned how to deal with that. And then the flows at critical location, which helps us understand our non-consumptive needs for fish and recreation. One of the things that came out of the study that we all think was very important was they had thousands of different supply and demand couplings that they ran through their models. And what we all realized is we can see these things coming ahead of time. We all know we've got a 25 million acre foot bucket in Lake Powell. And as long as we have 25 million acre feet in Lake Powell, which of course we don't now, but we could eventually, maybe again, hopefully, we know we're not in a danger of a leaf area deficit anytime soon. So we've got some signposts and that the study came up with to say, we've got some lead time before we see it coming. And then we added some options and strategies to investigate how to meet those imbalances. Again, some of them are in the upper basin, but most of them are in the lower basin. And they kind of fell into three categories. There's 100 or more options and strategies that the study looked at. And they fell in the category of increased supply, reduce demand, and modify operations. And there wasn't any silver bullet, not one strategy would work, so they had to combine them into portfolios, very similar to what Todd talked about and what the roundtables are looking at. So as far as the options and strategies go, the key findings for Colorado, again, upper basin balancers are not significant. The options and strategies primarily benefit the lower basin. Again, I have to keep saying this, we're in it all together, but we need to remember what's important for Colorado. Upper basin water banking was proposed by the conservation groups, and they were primarily, because we don't have a lot of issue with the leaf area deficit, they're primarily for environmental and recreation flows. But the water banking could mitigate a potential leaf area deficit. And I think as the state of Colorado is interested in continuing to look at the water banking options. Large-scale imports and options and strategies provide the largest benefits. Primarily that's a desal from Pacific Ocean, and they did look at some imports from other rivers, which I'm sure you guys have read about in the paper, the Missouri River pipeline thing. Whatever they do with desal, or if a potential import from another basin came, would require a long time to permit. So what Colorado needs to, all the basin states, but one of the key findings is, we need to look at those pretty closely soon and decide whether they're important or whether we just need to forget and never talk about them again. So our challenges. Does the basin need additional out-of-basin supplies, conservation, or a combination? This was a quote in the Denver Post saying, huge pipelines aren't solutions to fundamental problems that we're using more water than we can sustain. We need to work together on conservation and reuse strategies that can have an immediate positive impact. Again, the question is, can we conserve our way out of this problem? I'm not sure we can conserve our way out of the lower basin problem. Another challenge Colorado has that's coming out of this study is groups that are calling for reallocation of the Colorado River Compact, which is something that, as a citizen of the state of Colorado, all of us should make sure that that never happens. But we get things like this in the Denver Post recently. Federal authorities warn that even if courts step in to reallocate shrinking river flows. And recently, at a water leader panelist, one of the folks from a conservation group actually asked, when are we going to scrap the Colorado River Compact and start over? So these are challenges that we all need to be aware of and try to counteract, I think. So what are the next steps for Colorado then? We need to adopt I think we need to look at the signposts, adopt an approach to say, we can't predict when or if climate's going to change or how bad the weather's going to be. We can't even predict, mean, this year, we couldn't even predict whether we were going to get these great snows we've had lately. So how can we predict what's going to happen in the future? So instead, let's figure out and refine these signposts so that we see it coming and we can all consider options and strategies in place beforehand instead of saying there's a great percentage that's going to happen. So the probability issue, I think, needs to kind of go away. The new climate models, just so everyone knows, are out. They haven't been published yet, but I've had a preview, and they're showing something different than the last climate models do. And actually, they're showing things more favorable for Colorado as far as precip goes. So we don't know. Climate science is a fairly new science right now. And we clearly need to help the lower basin find solutions to their over-appropriation issues because it will flow upstream if we don't. Other things, we just need to support, I think we need to support the science, the continued development of client research. One of the things that I found, which was a little bit surprising to me, was how little Reclamation and the rest of the study teams understood about shortages in the upper basin, because in the lower basin there are no shortages. They want water, they release it from Meade. Everything is on the main stem. So the concept of tributary shortages that we see even in a wet year in the late season for irrigation seem to be fairly foreign to most of the study team. And they also don't seem to grasp sort of the legal and policy implications of conservation and reuse. The idea that we can't just conserve and shepherd it downstream is something that they've really grappled with, and we need to help the study team in Reclamation in the lower basin states understand that. So my final thoughts. Colorado is entitled to and needs to protect their ability to develop their full apportionment. Whether they ever develop it or not, whether we ever get there, clearly we're showing we're not getting there by 2060. We cannot, I feel we really need to protect our right to develop it. The basin study and next steps do provide the framework to manage risks associated with the future, and we should be involved in that process. And then this last piece was a new one I threw on because I was trying to be challenging. So we need to balance the idea of progressing cautiously with development and capitalizing on a little bit of a crisis right now. So you guys can, I'm going to leave that as my last thought. And if you have any questions.
I think you should hang on to the mic. I can't imagine there won't be a question or two. Yes, we have. Ed, are you going to run all the way over here? Mr. Microphone is on his way.
I can talk loud.
My immediate reaction to this was that I'm shocked, absolutely shocked that you would suggest that maybe something showed up in a newspaper that wasn't absolutely 100% factual. So I'm going to be, reeling from that all day. Okay, now for questions.
Yeah, a few seminars back, there was discussion about a negotiation with Mexico that was starting to get them off a fixed allocation and onto a percentage. Is that happening, or do you have any idea or update on it?
Yeah, Minute 319 was signed about the same time the study came out, right before Christmas, that set the framework for the state of Colorado. There's probably someone here who knows this better than I do, but set the framework for for the United States and Mexico to share its shortages, which was sort of the first time that had happened, and also gave Mexico the ability to store surplus water in Meade if there's room. There's some other things, but yes, that's progressed, and I think that what I think I understand. One of you guys is going to know more. I'm pointing at Diane. One of you guys is going to know more than I do, but it's sort of it was a first step, and it was pretty monumental, and it sets the stage for more negotiations.
Does that imply that Mexico's in agreement with that?
Yes, it does. They signed, so it must.